When a person knows exactly when they're going to die, everything about their life changes. The sound of a ticking clock becomes louder, the air in the cell feels heavier, and the smallest moments like a beam of sunlight breaking through the bars start to feel sacred. Death row inmates live in that tension between existence and extinction. Every breath they take carries the weight of finality. They know what most people ignore. That time isn't infinite and that every passing moment is a piece of life slipping quietly away. For them, time is not just a measurement, it's a teacher. It's the one thing they can't escape and the one thing they can finally understand. Imagine waking up and realizing that every sunrise you see could be your last. How would you look at the world? Would you still argue over petty things, hold grudges or scroll endlessly through your phone? Probably not. You'd start to see life differently, sharper, clearer, more fragile. That's what death row inmates experience. They live in a world stripped of distractions, where every day is a mirror reflecting who they are. They remember the faces they hurt, the choices they made, and the moments they took for granted. But most importantly, they learn to see time not as something they own, but as something they borrowed and never valued until now. One inmate once said, "You don't realize how precious 1 hour is until you only have a few left." That sentence alone carries more truth than most of us dare to face. We move through our days thinking we have endless tomorrows, endless chances to fix our mistakes, to chase our dreams, to say, "I love you" to someone who deserves to hear it. But the truth is, we don't. None of us have any guarantee of another day. We live like time is an unlimited resource, when in reality, it's the most limited thing we have. And yet the people who sit on death row, those society calls the condemned, are the ones who often learn to treasure it more. Inside those cold concrete walls, they start noticing the details the free world overlooks. The sound of rain hitting metal, the warmth of a guard's humanity. The way the wind smells through a tiny window, they hold on to those moments like jewels because they know they're running out. It's strange, isn't it? How people who once destroyed lives can end up teaching us how to live. It's ironic, maybe even unfair, but it's real. They show us what happens when time becomes a mirror instead of a blur. Time on death row moves differently. It's not measured by hours or days but by realizations. Every thought echoes, every regret multiplies, and every tiny joy, no matter how small, becomes a reminder of the life that still exists within. Some start to write letters, some turn to faith, some break completely, but almost all of them begin to understand what life truly meant all along. They begin to see that life was never about how long they had. It was about what they did with the time given to them. And that realization, as painful as it is, holds a lesson for every single one of us breathing freely outside those walls. We waste so much time. We wait for a someday. We tell ourselves we'll be happy when we get the job, the house, the car, the love story, but someday isn't promised. Death row inmates don't have a someday, they only have now. And that's where the difference lies. When tomorrow is stolen from you, today becomes everything. That's why they talk about things most of us ignore. The power of a single moment, the weight of a single word, the beauty in silence. They remind us that life doesn't need to be perfect to be meaningful. It just needs to be lived consciously. Think about how many times you've said, "I don't have time," to call a friend, to visit your parents, to work on your dream, to forgive someone, to rest. We say it so often that it's become a shield we hide behind. But if a person facing execution can find time to write a letter of apology, to pray for those they hurt, or to find peace with themselves, what excuse do we have? They make us face a truth that's both haunting and freeing. The difference between a wasted life and a meaningful one is not about how much time you have, but how awake you are while you're living it. And there's something deeply human in the way death brings clarity. Clarity. On death row, the future doesn't exist, only the present does. And that awareness transforms the soul. Many inmates describe how they start reliving moments in their minds, childhood memories, family dinners, birthdays, sunsets. They replay them not with guilt, but with gratitude. Because even though their freedom is gone, their memories remind them they were once alive. That realization alone teaches us something profound. We don't value our moments until they become memories, and we don't value our time until it's running out. In the stillness of those long nights, surrounded by silence, they begin to see that time was never their enemy, it was their guide. It tried to warn them through missed chances, broken relationships, sleepless nights, but they ignored it. We all do. We rush through life always planning for tomorrow, never realizing that every plan depends on a heartbeat we might not have tomorrow. Death row inmates don't get to plan. And in that reflection, they find a kind of wisdom that most of us never reach because we're too busy running from the truth that they're forced to face. What they teach us is not about death, it's about life. They teach us that urgency is a gift, that if you have a dream, chase it now. If you love someone, tell them now. If you need to forgive, do it now. Because waiting for the right time is like waiting for forever, and forever doesn't exist. Every moment you hesitate, every second you waste is a second you'll never get back. They understand that better than anyone. That's why their letters, their interviews, their final words often sound less like confessions and more like lessons. Carved out of pain, regret and clarity, some people might say, "Oh, why should we learn from criminals?" But this isn't about glorifying them. It's about understanding what happens when life strips you down to your final truth. It's about seeing the raw honesty that emerges when time can no longer be ignored. These men and women, flawed and broken as they are, become mirrors for our own lives. Their stories whisper to us, don't wait until you're running out of time to start living like you mean it. If there's one thing death row teaches, it's this: life isn't measured in years but in awareness. You can live 80 years and still never truly be alive. Or you can live one day with full awareness, full gratitude, full purpose, and that day can mean more than a lifetime of distraction. The inmates who've seen the end up close don't ask for more time to make money or gain fame. They ask for time to say sorry, to feel sunlight, to see a sky without bars. That simplicity should wake us up. It should make us question how we're spending the time we still have. Because somewhere right now, a man is sitting in a cell counting the days he has left, while somewhere else, another man is wasting those same days on things that won't matter in the end. The only difference between them is awareness. The death row inmate knows the clock is ticking. The rest of us pretend it's not, but it is. Every second, every heartbeat, and one day that final second will arrive for each of us too. The only question that will matter then is, did we live the time we were given or did we just let it pass? When someone lives with the knowledge that their death is coming, not someday, but on a specific date, at a specific time, something remarkable happens inside them. The walls that once held hatred, regret and pride begin to crack, and through those cracks, something rare begins to shine: forgiveness. On death row, forgiveness becomes more powerful than freedom itself. It's not easy, not beautiful at first, it's raw, painful and deeply human. For many inmates, forgiveness begins not with others but with themselves, because facing your own reflection in the final stretch of life is the hardest sentence of all. Imagine waking up every day in a small cell, staring at the same cold walls, hearing the same footsteps outside, and knowing that each sound could be your last. In that silence, your mind replays every mistake, every face, every moment you can't undo. There's nowhere to run from guilt. It becomes your shadow. Some inmates break under that weight, but others begin to understand that forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened. It's about freeing the soul that's been chained to pain. They learn that forgiveness isn't given for the sake of others. It's a final act of peace with themselves. It's a way to die as a human being, not just as a number on a list. There's a story of an inmate who had taken a life decades ago. In his final months, he wrote to the victim's family, not asking for forgiveness but offering it. He forgave himself, not to forget but to make peace with the truth. He wrote, "I cannot undo what I did, but I can stop hating myself for being the person who did it." That single line carries a message deeper than most sermons, because what he understood was this: guilt without forgiveness is another kind of prison, one that even bars can't contain. And that's the prison most of us live in without realizing it. We carry our own invisible death rows, mistakes, grudges, betrayals, regrets. We trap ourselves in stories that never move forward because we refuse to forgive. But those who sit in the shadow of death know that holding on to pain only wastes the time you have left. They don't forgive because it's easy, they forgive because it's necessary. They realize that forgiveness is not about weakness, it's the most courageous act a person can perform. It takes strength to say, "Yes, I was wrong now," or "Yes, they hurt me, but I choose peace anyway." That kind of strength is rare in the outside world, but inside those cold, locked cells, it becomes the only thing worth fighting for. Some inmates find faith, others find meaning through writing or reflection. And that forgiveness is not a transformation. It's the moment when a person chooses to stop being defined by what destroyed them. It's the breaking of an inner chain that keeps dragging them back to their worst day. Many of them start to see their victims not with arrogance or denial, but with empathy. They begin to feel the pain they caused, and in feeling it fully, they start to change. Forgiveness becomes the bridge between who they were and who they are trying to become before the end. And yet, it's not just about forgiving others, it's about forgiving themselves. Because that's the hardest one of all. How do you look in the mirror and forgive the person who took away another's future? How do you forgive the one who ruined families, dreams or peace? For most death row inmates, that question haunts every heartbeat. But as time runs out, some of them learn the truth. Forgiveness isn't permission, it's not saying it was okay. It's saying, I choose to stop being a prisoner of my own guilt. That's why some of the most profound words ever spoken on death row are words of peace, not fear. Fear. Words that say, I'm sorry or I forgive. Forgiveness becomes their final freedom. Their body may still be locked up, but their spirit begins to walk out of those gates long before they die. That's something even the executioner cannot take away. One inmate once said, they can take my life, but they can't take my peace. Those words hold more power than most people realize. Because peace doesn't come from escape, it comes from acceptance. It comes from facing the darkness and deciding not to let it define you anymore. In a world where people hold grudges for years, where relationships end over pride, and where revenge is mistaken for strength, the lessons from these inmates cut through like lightning. They remind us that forgiveness doesn't make you weak, it makes you unstoppable. It removes the poison that slowly kills your spirit. It heals wounds that time alone can't touch. Some of the most remarkable moments on death row aren't the confessions or the tears. They're the quiet moments when a man or woman finally finds peace in their own heart. It's not about escaping judgment, it's about finding a kind of redemption that no courtroom can give. Forgiveness in its truest form is rebellion. Rebellion against bitterness, against despair, against the inner voice that says you are beyond saving. It's easy to forgive when life is good, but to forgive while waiting for death, that's divine. That's a kind of humanity most of us never reach. They show us that if a person can forgive while sitting in the shadow of their own execution, then surely we can forgive while standing in the light of our freedom. It makes you wonder how much lighter our lives would feel if we lived the way they learned to live, not waiting for the end to make peace, not waiting for loss to value compassion, not waiting for death to choose forgiveness. Because forgiveness doesn't change the past. Who changed the past? It changes the future. It's not about forgetting what happened, it's about refusing to carry the weight of it any longer. Death row inmates understand the truth too late, but we still have time. And that's the real tragedy and the real gift of their stories, that they can teach us how to live before we reach the point of no return. Now, in the end, forgiveness is not a word, it's a state of being. For those who walk the long, lonely corridor to God again, forgiveness becomes a final act of… They die not as monsters, but as people who rediscovered what it means to be alive, even as the clock ran out, and that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson they leave behind. That freedom isn't found in the absence of walls, it's found in the presence of forgiveness. Some people live behind iron bars and others live behind invisible ones. You can walk in sunlight, laugh with friends, post pictures and still be a prisoner. The truth is, not every prison has walls and not every prisoner wears chains. Death row inmates know this better than anyone because they've lived both kinds of imprisonment, the kind that locks your body and the kind that locks your soul. When they speak about freedom, they aren't talking about open skies or unlocked doors. They're talking about a freedom that begins inside the mind. Their stories reveal something that shakes us to the core. You don't need a prison cell to be trapped. Many of them say that before they were arrested, they were already imprisoned by anger, addiction, greed or pride. They didn't need guards or walls to confine them. Their emotions and impulses did that perfectly well. We walk through life bound by invisible chains, chains of fear, comparison, resentment and self-doubt. We spend our days chasing approval, running from pain and numbing the silence with distractions. But in doing so, we trade our freedom for comfort. We become prisoners of habits we hate, of thoughts we don't control, of lives that no longer fulfill us. The difference between us and them is that they've been forced to face their prison, while we keep pretending ours doesn't exist. When a death row inmate talks about freedom, their words carry weight because they've been stripped of everything. They can't walk where they want, can't see who they want, can't decide when the day ends. And yet, some of them begin to feel freer than they ever did outside those walls. Huh? Because they start to realize that freedom was never about movement, it was about peace of mind. It was about the ability to control what goes on inside when you can't control anything outside. They begin to master the one thing most of us neglect, the mind. In the silence of confinement, they start hearing the voices that most people drown out with noise, their conscience, their memories, their regrets. It's terrifying at first to face yourself without distraction, but slowly that silence becomes their teacher. They learn that the real cell was never the concrete box they slept in. It was the pain, the anger, the ego that lived inside them. One inmate once said, "I thought prison began when they locked the door, but prison began the day I stopped being honest with myself." That sentence alone exposes the truth about human life. Our lies, our fears, our refusal to confront our truth keep us caged far more tightly than any barbed wire ever could. We often envy freedom, but most of us don't even know what it means. We say we want to be free, but we're addicted to validation, terrified of failure, and obsessed with control. We fear silence, we fear stillness, and we fear facing the parts of ourselves we've buried under years of distraction. In that sense, we're all serving sentences of our own making. The only difference is that the inmates on death row have a clock ticking loudly enough to force awareness, while we have the illusion of time to keep us comfortably numb. They learn quickly what we spend our whole lives avoiding. That freedom isn't about escaping the world, it's about escaping yourself. One of the most profound lessons death row teaches is that peace doesn't depend on place. Some inmates find serenity sitting in a 6-foot cell with a death warrant hanging over them. Meanwhile, people outside, surrounded by comfort and choices, still feel restless, anxious and unfulfilled. The paradox is painful but true. External freedom without inner peace is still imprisonment. The more we fill our lives with noise, the further we drift from real freedom. True, liberation begins when you stop running from your own thoughts and start mastering them. The human mind is both the cage and the key. That's the wisdom born out of isolation. Those who have nothing left to lose begin to see everything clearly. They start forgiving, reflecting, appreciating the little things. The warmth of sunlight through the bars, the sound of birds they can't see, the smell of rain through a small window. These details become miracles. And when life reduces you to the basics, you finally realize how little you need to feel alive. Freedom then becomes an internal awakening, not a physical condition. You can walk freely through the world and still be bound by fear. You can travel across continents and still feel stuck in the same emotional cycle. You can have millions of followers online and still feel unseen. That's the modern prison, a life full of movement but empty of meaning. Death row inmates in their stillness learn the opposite. Their world stands still, but inside that stillness they start to grow. They learn that freedom is clarity, seeing life as it is without the fog of excuses or distractions. Many of them spend their last months writing letters, not to plead for mercy, but to make peace with themselves and the world. They write about forgiveness, love, gratitude and awareness. They stop chasing happiness and start understanding it. One wrote, "They took my body, but they couldn't take my mind unless I let them." That's real power, that's real power, that's real freedom. And that's the kind of strength most people never discover because they're too busy trying to control everything around them, while ignoring the chaos within. The lesson is simple, but it's not easy. You don't have to be locked up to lose your freedom. Every time you let anger rule you, you lose it. Every time you let fear stop you, you lose it. Every time you live for others' approval instead of your own truth, you lose it. Real imprisonment begins when you let the world dictate who you are instead of deciding it for yourself. And real freedom begins when you stop needing permission to be at peace. So, what do these inmates teach us? They teach us that freedom isn't given, it's chosen. Every time you forgive instead of hate, it's chosen every time you speak truth instead of hiding behind lies. It's chosen every time you face pain instead of escaping it. Their stories strip away the illusions we live under and show us what matters: awareness, acceptance and inner stillness. Somewhere in the world, a man behind bars is freer than someone walking in the open. Not because of where he is, but because of what he's realized. He's found peace in a place built for despair, and that's the greatest irony of all, that sometimes it takes losing everything to finally see that freedom was never outside of us, it was always within. So, what do we learn from the voices behind those iron bars? That freedom, forgiveness and time are not luxuries, they are choices. The truth is, we are all living on borrowed time, but only a few of us truly live before it runs out. The ones who've stared death in the face remind us of something sacred, that life is not measured by years, but by awareness, by courage, by the strength to change before it's too late. You don't need to wait for the end to start living right now. Leacock, you don't need to lose everything to realize what really matters. You don't need a prison cell to start breaking the chains that hold your heart. Every breath is a chance. Every sunrise is a new beginning. Every mistake is a teacher wearing the face of pain. So rise above the past that tries to own you, above the fears that whisper you can't, above the regrets that tell you it's over. It's not over. Not while your heart is still beating. Not while your soul is still burning. You can forgive, you can change, you can live again. The walls around you, whether made of steel or silence, were never stronger than the will inside you. Break them. Don't wait for the sentence of death to wake you up to the gift of life. Wake up now, love now, live now, be free now. Because in the end, it's not how long you live that matters, it's how deeply you live before the clock stops ticking.